We are live. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you, Erica. So in today's presentation, I'll give an introductory overview of the Raja Yoga school that was at the Lomaland community founded by Catherine Tingley in the late 1890s through 1942. In the beginning, I will give a little bit of background of educational ideas within Theosophy and the early writings of Blavatsky. So here we start off. I just have a quote from Socrates: "Education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel." This becomes rather the keynote of all the theosophical schools coming after that. So again, the first part, we'll have some thoughts on Blavatsky and then Catherine Tingley's Raja Yoga School at Lomaland, and then also just a brief overview of their four primary schools that evolved in the theosophical world of, in addition to the Raja Yoga School, were the schools of Rudolf Steiner, the Waldorf schools, Maria Montessori schools, and the schools of Jiddu Krishnamurti. So Blavatsky's educational foundation principles can be synthesized as to cultivate the mind in the right direction, to strengthen will and self-reliance, to inculcate the love of one's neighbor and the feeling of mutual interdependence and brotherhood, altruism, and to train and form character for practical life, unselfishness. Blavatsky was critiqued modern education, that it was primarily focused on the need to pass examinations, that it promoted jealousy and envy, prepared one for a life of what she called ferocious selfishness and the struggle for honors, and that it was mechanistic and full of prejudice, memorization, and dead vocables, as she put it in her forceful way. Few quotes from Blavatsky's Key to Theosophy. "We would reduce the purely mechanical work of the memory to an absolute minimum and devote the time to the development and training of the inner senses, faculties, and latent capacities. Children should be taught self-reliance, love for all men, altruism, mutual charity, and more than anything else, to think and reason for themselves. We would endeavor to deal with each child as a unit and to educate it so as to produce the most harmonious and equal unfoldment of its powers in order that its special aptitudes should find their full natural development." And then she says, "We should aim at creating free men and women, free intellectually, free morally, unprejudiced in all respects, and above all things, unselfish. And we believe that much, if not all this, could be obtained by proper and truly theosophical education." This is the late 1880s in Victorian England when she's writing these things. Conditions are rather dire, extremely dreadful, really. London is horribly polluted. The social class, upper class, lower class conditions are extreme. Poverty and working conditions are challenging. And seeing the results of this in the educational system, the theosophists of the time are looking for a new paradigm, a new way through this. So we have an overview, putting it very basically, body, soul, and spirit. The transitory part is the body, the soul is the learning, educated part, the spirit is the immortal part. And Blavatsky outlines the idea to develop the inner senses, faculties, and latent capacities, develop ethical culture, and each child is a unique unit, an educational process which she describes as the harmonious and equal unfoldment of its powers. I added in some background at the time. Uh, there was, I think, an important article written in after Blavatsky died, but still, well, under the editorship of G.R.S. Mead and Annie Besant in her magazine Lucifer the Lightbringer. Sarah Corbett wrote an article on entitled Friedrich Froebel, the Mystic and His Educational Theories. So this is important as it shows the Theosophist's attention to the educational theories of the time. Froebel was the German innovator of childhood development and education. And in the article, well, here's an outline also of Froebel's key 7 educational components. This, again, Sarah Corbett outlines that these elements combined with theosophy would make an ideal school. So this starts to lay the groundwork for what comes after that. You have here the 7 ideas he had, development in all areas, socially, academically, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. 2, motor expression, focusing on play, activity, talk, and self-reflection. 3, social participation. 4, free self-expression. Creativity, holistic learning rooted in play, nature, and learning through exploration, and child-centered philosophy. So this was all written in the by the mid-1800s. But from this comes a lot of educational innovation toward the end of the century and into the early 20th century. That was really very important as a basis for which the Theosophists worked from. He had in his thought basic ideas which are very harmonious with theosophical ideas. All things have their being in and through the divine unity, and each child is a thought of God. Education consists in leading man as a thinking, intelligent being, growing into self-consciousness to a pure and unsullied, conscious and free representation of the inner law of divine unity, and in teaching him ways and means thereto. Corbett was a British theosophist. She later was the person who edited the collection from the Vehan. But she says in her article, it appears to me that the work of Theosophists with regards to education is to enlarge and complete the work which he has begun. And she ends by quoting Froebel, the essential business of the school is not so much to teach and to communicate a variety and multiplicity of things as it is to give prominence to the ever-living unity that is in all things. So here we have the beginning of the basis of a more holistic educational view and methods. So this was hugely influential on John Dewey and other educators in the United States. There were others in Chicago with Dewey, including Colonel Francis Parker, who founded a school in San Diego, which still exists today, which is a great school for liberal arts and creative expression. And the theosophy-inspired educational approaches, Raja Yoga education, Montessori, Steiner's Waldorf School, Krishnamurti's expanded Froebel's mystical universal principles with different emphasis. Lomaland's Raja Yoga School emphasized the expressive arts. I added this in just as a side in a way. This was Blavatsky's last printed editorial article, Civilization, the Death of Art and Beauty, where she anticipates our current issues with the imbalance of the ecological system, due to the expanding and it says here, a few years more, there will not remain within a radius of 50 miles around our large cities one single rural spot inviolate from vulgar speculation. This influences the Lomaland community later, which spent a huge amount of energy and time literally reforesting the area of Point Loma, which still is in there today. So there are four primary examples of education based on theosophical universal principles. The schools of Maria Montessori, the schools of Rudolf Steiner, Waldorf schools, and the schools of Jiddu Krishnamurti in India, United States, and the UK, and Catherine Tingley's Raja Yoga School. Personally, what I find most amazing about these four different uh, usually viewed as different modes of education that all have their roots in theosophy in slightly different ways, is how similar they are. They each emphasize different aspects, but the similarities are really quite amazing. So here we have an overview of the Lomaland community in 1910, taken from an aerial view. You can see the things that are well developed at this point. This school, this community had started in 1899, really, in terms of people arriving and engaging in things. The orchards have been planted. You can see on the left and in the center, the Temple of Peace and the Academy. Other buildings, and on the right, you see the schools, children's homes where they lived, and everything is developing at that point in time. The architecture of Point Loma, Lomaland community was put together as kind of I would call it a collaboration between Catherine Tingley's vision and actually the artist, Theosophist Reginald Machel had arrived at Lomaland. And his influence is and design work is also in the buildings as well. He did the interiors of the temple and academy, and on the left you see the house that was built by and for Albert Spalding and his wife Elizabeth Mayer Spalding. These are all based on principles of sacred geometry. Here at Lomaland, we see the development of the gardens and orchards. These look like avocado trees in the front here. The Lomaland Theosophists were the first to introduce the avocado to the United States as uh, from which it became very popular and expanded as a commercial product. They had contacts in Cuba and Central America, which brought in different kinds of avocados to be cultivated. So Raja Yoga education is in daily practice included music, drama, art, literature, agriculture. And Tingley's theme for the community was, as she says, think of theosophy not so much as a body of philosophic or other teaching, but as the highest law of conduct, which is the enacted expression of divine love or compassion. As a principle of education, she expressed the idea that the truest and grandest thing of all as regards education is to attract the mind of the child to the fact that the immortal self is ever seeking to bring the whole being into a state of perfection. The real secret of the Raja Yoga system is rather to evolve the child's character than to overtax the child's mind, is to bring out rather than bring to the faculties of the child. The grander part is from within. This is based on the theosophical principle that within each person is the latent capacities, and the environment and the teaching and the education's function is to draw out those latent capacities into full expression. Basis of the Raja Yoga education is the essential divinity of man and the necessity for transmuting everything within his nature which is not divine. To do this, no part can be neglected, and the physical nature must share to the full in the care and attention which are required. Neither can the most assiduous training of the intellect be passed over, but it must be made subservient to the forces of the heart. The intellect must be the servant and not the master, if order and equilibrium are to be attained and maintained. In such a system as this, it is necessary that the teachers shall not only understand the principles of theosophy, but that they shall apply those principles to their own lives. Within the school, though, it's interesting that theosophy was not taught formally. So, and this was considered very important to Catherine Tingley and in the Raja Yoga school view. There was a monthly magazine just for children called the Raja Yoga Messenger, which was filled with nature stories, myths, uh, all kinds of things, but not with formal theosophy. The idea was to surround the child with opportunities to explore and grow their own interests. There was not any kind of dogmatic or doctrinal even side to the curriculum. It was, a kind of a combination of classical education infused with theosophical ideas, including mythology, world religions, philosophy, science, etc. Thing that goes on. True education is the power to live in harmony with our environment, the power to draw out from the recesses of our own nature all the potentialities of character. The Raja Yoga system of education at Point Loma is therefore not confined to the receipt of information at certain stated hours of the day and in a specified manner. It consists in the regulation of the whole life upon the highest ideal, which must alike govern the most hidden thought as effectively as it does the mutual relationship of the students. I'll get to later, I'll show how the daily curriculum of instruction, it started very early, 5:30, 6 a.m. There was, the community would assemble in the Greek theater, but prior to that, there was physical exercise. Young men would run down to the beach and back. And then there was also calisthenics, group movement, and things. And then in the Greek theater, there was a gathering of silent inspirational time. But school was over after lunch in terms of the instructional time. And then there was time working in the gardens and nature and etc. And then often later in the day, again, there was back to music lessons, art, things like that. Here's some photos. Young children, these were called the young philosophers. Which ones? I have this one, and there's one Eldon colored nicely. Little philosophers. I'll go back. I think this was one also clarified, makes it more clear. That's an old sepia tone. Here you have a woodworking class. These were all originally children instructed by Reginald Machell, a British theosophist who came to Lomaland. He's rather famous for his visionary paintings, which we'll talk about next week. Here you have, these are Cuban students and teacher. The young woman teaching had been a student in the school and then later, uh, as she grew older, became an instructor. Early in the 1900s, the Theosophists established schools in Cuba. Catherine Tingley had been connected early on with Emilio Bacardi in Cuba, and had stopped there on her return from India to talk with him about establishing Lomaland. He then sent his children to Lomaland to be educated. This was after the terrible Spanish-American War. Tingley had sent, she had what was called the uh, like Universal Brotherhood Relief Corps kind of idea, and had sent, you know, relief food and clothing to after the war in Cuba, and then worked with Bacardi to found 4 schools there. Teachers from Lomaland went to Cuba to teach, and also from England. And they continued for about 12 years and ran into some financial difficulties. Lomaland artist Lander Lester taught there, another Lomaland artist, Grace Betts also taught in Cuba. But probably, I think, 180 students from Cuba were educated at Lomaland. And these are early Rodrigo student classes, 1908. And here's some of these students here are from Cuba. So here Tingley outlines the, balance of the faculties in educational system. The basis of this education is the essential divinity of man and the necessity for transmuting everything in his nature which is not divine. To do this, at no part must be neglected, and the physical nature must share to the full in the care and the attention which are required. Neither can the most assiduous training of the intellect be passed over. It must be made subservient to the forces of the heart. The intellect must be the servant, not the master, if order and equilibrium are to be obtained. Again, young students at Lomaland, probably around 1910, or even a little before. Pictures aren't always dated, so we can always tell the dates by seeing the size of the plants, basically. So this is quite early. Or sometimes recognizing who's in the photos. Later, this is a young man astronomy class being overseen by the cat in the center. And here's the color version. It's a little later, probably 1918. Again, young students, early 1900s. Julia Hecht is instructing. He studied music in Europe with Franz Liszt. actually. Here's the color version. Music and folk dancing. You can So Lomaland had both this combination of a highly disciplined environment in one way, everyone arising at the same time, meals were in group together, in silence. It's almost like a monastery in certain respects. In other ways, it was quite free and open in ways that were quite unusual as well. Color version would be the steps to the academy building. Catherine Tingley followed a kind of combination of Greek architecture infused with some other elements. Here's Swedish students in their folk costumes preparing for folk dance. This is an originally hand-colored photograph, not AI colored. One of the largest groups of students at Lomaland were the Swedish students. So Raja Yoga, the expressive arts were part of the daily activity of everyone, pretty much everyone, especially music, art, drama. Everyone participated, whether one was very good at it or not. Tingley felt it was really imperative, So she says, art under the Raja Yoga system is a principle which pervades all life and activity. Under this science, it becomes the true expression of soul ideas, and both art and decoration are no longer adventitious or capricious additions to our environment, but integral parts to which they belong. And the well-known artists we'll talk about next time from Lomaland, Morris Braun, a great plein air artist of nature in California and San Diego, would give the theme of art as art for humanity's sake. There was this idea that art was a function, had this higher view. And then, within like this is an illustrated page out of I think the Raja Yoga Messenger, with a quote from Catherine Tingley in the center. So these kinds of art designs filled the magazine each month and were done by the artists at Lomaland. All the printing, all the bookbinding, everything. They had their own print shop. Lomaland was more like a village than even a community. It was quite all the elements were there, growing their own fruits and vegetables, shop, roadways, fixing the cars that they had later. When it came to putting in electricity at Lomaland, Tingley wouldn't allow it unless the wires and everything were underground. And they still are on what is now the Point Loma Nazarene campus where Lomaland was. All the electrical wires are underground. The theater became a central part of Lomaland and its educational activities. Here's a picture from about 1915. It was constructed in early 1900s. Most of the dramatic productions were done there. Shakespeare based Greek tragedies, comedies. Had a great view over the Pacific. The Greek theater is still there, but the canyon in back was flattened into an athletic field in the late 1960s, I think. So here you have production of the humanities, the goddesses of good fortune having been transformed by Athena from the Erinyes or avenging furies. It's dramatic production. Again, in the future talk, we'll go through in detail because this was the play given most often. Catherine Tingley felt it was most psychologically transforming play and kind of its archetypal basis was a very important part of the very theosophical in its basis. So there were many, many, many productions even before Lomaland starting in New York in the late 1890s. Here you have some of the costuming. So here, the fairy scene from Midsummer Night's Dream. So a typical production at Lomaland. The whole community was involved. All the children participated. They made all the costumes, choreography, music, everything. Usually 250 people were involved in putting the whole production together. So this was also a central part of the education for all ages of children were participating in these dramatic productions, music events. There was some kind of music event, either orchestral or chorus practice, literally every day. So Tingley chose the term Raja Yoga, not that it was being expressly something from Indian yoga, but just as a term to indicate the balance of the faculties, physical, mental, spiritual. She says here, discipline is always necessary, but it should always be made clear that the ultimate source of discipline is the child's own higher nature and will. Guardian and teacher simply interpret and guide. The child makes to his guardians a double appeal from the lower nature and from the higher. If the appeal of the lower nature alone is responded to, the indulgence ensues and the child's nature is spoiled and the seeds of future sorrow are sown. The teacher must be able to recognize the appeal of the child's higher nature and to respond to it, thus manifesting true kindness, earning real gratitude, and sowing the seeds of future weal. Such are some of the principles of Raja Yoga education. So I think some of these theosophical principles distinguish all four of the theosophical schools and the Raja Yoga school from the uh, liberal arts-based new educational methods of John Dewey and others from the early 1900s. So the view is important in Raja Yoga, is teaching the child that it is an immortal soul incarnate in a body. We must, I left the word out, we must inculcate the difference between selfish instincts and the care for others. But unless there is behind this moral teaching the rational intellectual teaching, the result will probably be only a subtle hypocrisy. Teach the child that the soul is his real self, that he is immortal, and he lived before he was born and will continue to live after the change called death. The intuition of the unspoiled child is able to perceive and grasp than to teach them. We have far more need to refrain from unteaching children than to teach them. All this is illustrated by the results obtained in the Raja Yoga teaching. It is this that will solve the problem of education by producing self-disciplined people. So this typical the photo tells the story. This is afternoon after school is over, and one of the children. I mean, it's obviously a little bit staged photo of the time. Everyone's facing the camera, but it's really true. Everyone's working in the garden, cutting flowers, making floral displays. One of the activities that the Rajago children did every week, which is part of Catherine Tingley's outreach, was prison reform. And every week, if you can imagine, um, flowers were picked and small little bundles of flowers were put together, and hand lettered quotes from inspirational literature, theosophical literature, were put in a little bundle with the flowers. And the children made all these, and then they were taken and distributed. And the flowers were, there was a bundle, a little group of flowers and a little quote for every single prisoner in jail, the jails of San Diego. That'd be something to do today. Uh, in addition to that, of course, Tingley was a great campaigner against the death penalty. So some keystones of Tingley's Raja Yoga education system: music, drama, and art. So music, drama, art, there's integration of music, drama, art, and especially the expressive arts. With children also, this took place in music. For example, in the young children, there were also what they practiced, they called action songs, which actually had physical movements while singing, which was rather unique. Another unique part of the musical instruction, I couldn't find the photo right away to put it in here, but when children were learning the keyboard, all the notes on the keyboard on the piano were color coded. This comes, of course, from Blavatsky's view of correspondences. You find it in her esoteric instructions, but it was incorporated into the actual instructions of the children, where color and sound were seen as uh, integral, as coeval. The and also in drama, this was more where Tingley really was in her element. She actually, directed most of the plays herself. She had some background in dramatic acting. It's not kind of, her early years are not clear, so it's kind of lost. But she traveled in Europe in a dramatic troupe, is most certain. So in doing the plays, she would often give a student, put them in a role that was very challenging for them. There are many stories about this, or give them a job to do that was also rather difficult. Uh, whether it's making a costume or painting something, doing stage prop or some choreography, or in the case of a couple of instances, Elsie Savage Benjamin recounts when they were missing a costume finished for one of the uh, gowns for one of the Greek plays, and Catherine Tingley came bustling in with there was a big pile of cloth on the table and just handed it to her, and there was the person that it had to be fitted with, and they had an hour to do it. Uh, and Catherine Tingley said, "Here, make the costume." A bunch of pins, And Elsie Savage was not someone well versed, and this was not her easy thing for her. This was not her mode. But she just jumped in and did it. And somehow it just turned out right. Just pinning and making something really quickly. Another example was my father's example, and it's small. The person to play Prospero in The Tempest became ill, and there were only a few weeks before the production. So Catherine Tingley handed it to him to do. He had, I forget, maybe a little over a month to memorize his lines and do everything. Again, he found this very transforming. It really shifted his whole character where expressing things in public arena became very easy for him after that. So again, the integral wholeness of spiritual life. Tingley envisioned an approach to drama where it is viewed as a core method for realizing a more integral wholeness, full spectrum of spiritual life for her students. In the daily life, these things all fit in. There was also literature, myth, poetry, and multi-language instruction. Virtually everyone was proficient in, of course, English, and many students came from Europe. Uh, so they had to learn English as a child as well. Uh, and then also, Spanish was always second on the list. Virtually everyone at Lomaland had conversational Spanish ability. This is also in the beginning had to do with the Cuban students coming, having to learn English, and those at Lomaland being able to speak Spanish with the Cuban students. Uh, you'll see in a minute, I'll give some examples from one student's letters home, Staffan Kronberg, Swedish theosophist. So, it, by the time he's a teenager, he's reading books in Spanish and also Victor Hugo in French, for example. Everyone's working every day in the garden, and nature walks are common. In those days, one could walk from Point Loma all the way out through Mission Valley, great nature walk all the way to Mission Dam and back. That would happen often, or often further walks into the backcountry as well. Physical culture, daily physical education, calisthenics, sports, and hiking, etc. I'll give some of these. This was Staffan Kronberg, born in the early 1900s, 1984. His father was a very famous Swedish artist, Julius Kronberg. So he was educated at the Rajega School from 1913 to 1921. So he would have been about age 11 to age 19. So his letters home were saved, and then after his retirement, he composed them into a series of They give a good overview of daily life at Lomaland. Some of it's quite humorous and very insightful, but it gives an idea of the curriculum and day-to-day activity. I'll go through this a little more quickly, uh, so I won't read through it all. But here he's recounting the fruits being grown in the orchard. Basically, year round, by 1920 anyway, they had fruit every day for breakfast, different time of year for the whole community from what they grew on site. Persimmons, figs, plums, avocados. And he mentions here fruit from Brazil, feijoa, olive trees, etc. Peaches. This gives an example of instruction in language, um, also having Latin, they're studying Virgil, reading in Latin, the Aeneid, Cicero, Spanish, French, he's reading Victor Hugo, Le Comte de Monte Cristo, which he says here, I read in Spanish during vacation, and now I'm reading in French just for fun. Here he is up at 6, breakfast 6:20, usually morning housework, 7:30, my lessons. Emmett, that's my father, and I meaning Stefan Kronberg, are Virgil till 10, 10 to 11:15, orchestra has rehearsal in the rotunda that's in the academy. 11:30, we have dinner. Afternoon, the school's over. Quite amazing. In the afternoon, we go for a walk down to the beach, to the sandstone cliff, the bluff, and I have written about, or somewhere else, for instance, Sunset Cliffs. Sometimes our Sunday walks are longer. Out to the lighthouse. That's the end of Point Loma. But that means starting at least an hour earlier in order not to come back too late. And they go down uh, after the walks around 4, then evening time, more Latin, and then meeting in the rotunda, that's in the academy. Catherine Tingley speaking, or there's a lecture. And then again, sleep, 9:30. And back to the garden in the morning with Reginald Machel in the garden, work there till 9:30. So every day is this interaction between study and nature is very strong. And gets an idea of curriculum here. He's not only learning to play violin and be in the orchestra, but also play French horn, more lessons, English literature. These classes were taught by Welsh poet and author Kenneth Morris, who lived at Lomaland, French mechanical drawing. There's a full curriculum of instruction, but the way in which it was interspersed with other activities is very unique and really helped give more balanced development of each person, each child. And then singing, everyone sang in there was chorus rehearsal. Also, all kinds of things studied. Here he had bookkeeping, history, Latin, Spanish, shorthand. Virtually everyone at Lomaland learned shorthand. In those days, it was as pervasive as our use of cell phones and the internet now. And there was also more than one orchestra at Lomaland. There was the main Raja Yoga Orchestra, but also here the Point Loma Orchestra. So this, here he says the other day they played a fantasia from Lohengrin, and it was very beautiful. In terms of Catherine Tingley's outreach, again, she was a very strong proponent of the abolition of the death penalty. And very unusual is the first governor of Arizona, Governor Hunt, uh, who was a Mason, Freemason, uh, and she collaborated a lot. He visited Lomaland, and he was against the death penalty. So Catherine Tingley went to Arizona and helped him campaign to abolish the death penalty, which was successful even then. Yeah. Of course, that was changed later, more, but even in Arizona, that happened at the time. And then how would Catherine Tingley campaign for such a thing? Is she took students with her to play music and make speeches. Not the usual kind of protest, that's for sure. Here's more from Stefan Kronberg's letters. I'm going to skip through this a little bit quicker. We can come back. This is an example here of the children operetta Trial by Jury. They wrote themselves. Uh, Very humorous operetta. Catherine Tingley had been away, just comes back from Cuba. One can imagine the students had this sense of the larger global world at that time. Catherine Tingley was constantly traveling back and forth to Europe and to Cuba. Here, Catherine Tingley visits her Native American Indian friends at Pala Reservation, came to visit. Some very brief quotes from Montessori, from Rudolf Steiner, from Jiddu Krishnamurti, which show in the broad sense the common basis that all these educational systems have together with the Raja Yoga system. All these four, in different ways, have as their basis theosophical ideas and uh, resource. Maria Montessori, of course, her most theosophical book is called The Absorbent Mind. Uh, she actually lived and resided at the Theosophical International Center at Adyar during the 1940s, during World War II. And she wrote The Absorbent Mind while she was there. An education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. It involves the spiritual development of man, the enhancement of his value as an individual, and the preparation of young people to understand the times in which they live. I won't read through all of these. Montessori, respect for the child, the absorbent mind, sensitive periods, prepared setting, auto education. Krishnamurti, many schools still today, both Montessori schools everywhere, uh, Krishnamurti schools in India, the US, and United Kingdom. Everything comes with self-knowledge. When the mind goes above and beyond the hindrances it has created for itself. It is the function of education to help each individual to discover all these psychological hindrances. Oak Grove School. Mission of Oak Grove School is to assist students in developing those qualities of mind, heart, and body. You could take that quote and put it on the Raja Yoga School. Be the same. And the same, I think, in Waldorf and also in Montessori. Here's 5 key aspects of Krishnamurti schools: holistic education, self-reflection, silence, forming relationships with nature, focus on understanding the mind and brain, and fostering freedom from conditioning and tradition. Montessori also had silent moments, and Catherine Tingley's said the Raja Yoga motto is now, and silence was a key aspect of inculcating in children a sense of the value of silence. Rudolf Steiner, Waldorf education. The spiritual view which we are here representing does not say here are limits of human knowledge, of human cognition. It says we must bring forth from the depths of human nature powers of cognition equal to observing man's complete nature, body, soul, and spirit. Again, this theme pervades all these theosophical educational systems. Waldorf education emphasizes hands-on learning, the arts, and a strong teacher-student relationship. This was also true at Lomaland. Uh, hands-on arts. I should also mention Montessori was in San Diego in, I think, 1919. She was giving a course on education at what was called then the Normal School, which became San Diego State University later. Undoubtedly, there was some interaction and cross connecting with the Raja Yoga School at the time. Catherine Tingley had links to the Normal School, which had a great dramatic uh, drama classes there and teacher. And like Lomaland, also it's not here on the Steiner Waldorf education, but also the agricultural methods and emphasis in Rudolf Steiner's teachings and Lomaland's emphasis on nature and agriculture is very similar. Overview I left blank, so I'm going to just talk. The overview again is Raja Yoga School was such that it, integrated in the expressive arts this idea of body, mind, and spirit, and that the expressive arts through music, art, literature were a key component of the child's development. And perhaps different than the usual liberal arts curriculums was this emphasis on the spiritual nature of each child and its very unique capacities of each child to express itself through these creative expressions. Maybe now, Erica, we could take some questions if you like.
Yes, if you have ended your presentation, then we are going to stop the live stream because we never stream the question and answer sessions.